from our State House studio in downtown Montgomery, I'm Karen Goldsmith. Thanks for joining us. Todd Stacy is off tonight. In state government news, the Joint Legislative Prison Oversight Committee met this week. One of the multiple issues they discussed was Alabama Governor Kay Ivey's executive order regarding the loss of correctional incentive time or good time. State Representative Chris England believes the governor's decision specifying the amount of time lost for certain violations was executive overreach.
Just from the separation of powers component of this issue, I am struggling to find where the executive branch has the authority to do this executive order. Statutorily, I believe that the appropriate place to determine the penalty structure would be within the legislature.
Bills addressing this issue have been pre-filed for consideration in the upcoming legislative session, which starts on Tuesday, March 7th. One of lawmakers' priority topics will be finding ways to keep improving the state's economic development incentives. Capitol Journal's Randy Scott has that report.
I think it's extremely important, especially the job that Secretary Campfield and his office has done to ensure that Alabama remains competitive.
This conference at the Business Council of Alabama gives a look at what some lawmakers say are priorities in the upcoming regular session. Economic development is at the top of the list, specifically being able to attract more businesses to the state, which brings more jobs.
We are going to compete with other states. We've got to have the best incentives. And so when the legislature asked us to, chair this, was glad to do it. And our goal is simple. We want to have the best incentives in the Southeast.
One of the questions I ask, if I could ask any of you in your business, whether it's a farm business or a trucking business, if you can make an investment and get a return of 173%, how many of them would do that? And, everybody in the room raised their hand.
Audience members hear from 3 legislative leaders about why renewing a program of incentives to attract businesses to Alabama is a good idea.
We've noticed that there's certainly been more investments in Kentucky and Tennessee, where they're doubling down in their rural areas throughout those particular states. And so because of the work that Secretary Campfield and his office has done, we're seeing tremendous growth, not just in the northern region of the state or the southern region of the state, but all throughout Alabama.
And the encouraging thing to me is this has been bipartisan. It's going to impact all 67 counties in this state and going to continue the growth. You look at Alabama, no matter where I go in this country, people are impressed and asking, what are y'all doing? This is a big part of our success, and we've got to make sure we get it reauthorized.
In my small business, if I could invest in that money and get back 173% of my investment, I think we'd do it every day. So I think that's one thing we've got to look at going forward. And continue to emphasize what it's done for our state. Our economy is growing at a pace I've never seen in my lifetime. And I certainly think it's a direct impact on these 2 incentives.
For Capitol Journal, I'm Randy Scott.
In advance of the session, lawmakers will hold 3 days of budget hearings next week. They will hear budget requests from a few entities funded in the Education Trust Fund and General Fund budgets. They will also discuss spending the remaining half of the state's $2.1 billion of American Rescue Plan Act funds. These are federal dollars given to states to assist with COVID-19 relief efforts. Last month, we spoke to Senate President Pro Tem Greg Reed about these dollars.
The ARPA funds are here. We have some very specific instruction from the Department of the Treasury. It's very different than the first round of ARPA funding, which included some revenue replacement funds. This is going to be very different in regards to the elements of restrictive focus on rule and reg from the Department of the Treasury. So I have worked with the governor, worked with Director Poole, and also the budget chairs in looking at ARPA funds.
The Alabama National Guard held an officer promotion ceremony for Brigadier General Jeffrey M. Smith. He is now the Alabama National Guard's Director of the Joint Staff. In this position, Brigadier General Smith will oversee operations of the state's Army National Guard and Air National Guard units and directorates.
I'm so grateful to everyone that was my leader, peer, or subordinate. I learned so much from each of you, and I'm very aware that all of you are the reason this promotion is possible. So I want to tell the younger service members, I want you to know that this is obtainable if it's your goal. No matter your background, success in the Alabama National Guard only requires 3 things: character, competency, and commitment.
And we'll be right back with tonight's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts.
The Oral Health Office of Alabama's Department of Public Health has 3 team members. Last month, I spoke with Jennifer Morris about their community dental care program. Joining me in studio today are Dr. Tommy Johnson, the office's director, and Mallory Rigsby, the coordinator of community water fluoridation. Thank you all so much for joining us here today, and a big welcome. Your first time here in the studio. We're very excited about it.
Thank you.
Well, first, before we get into the nuts and bolts of our conversation, let's start with you, Mallory. Tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to where you are today.
Okay, I started my career with the Department of Public Health in 2010. My degree is in Health Services Administration. I spent 8 years with tobacco prevention and control, and I spent a couple years with Alabama Childhood Lead Poisoning Prevention. And now I have been with the Oral Health Office as the fluoridation coordinator for almost a year.
Well, thank you. And Dr. Johnson, how about you?
I'm actually a Georgia transplant. I grew up there, and I went to LaGrange College, decided on a dental career. I graduated from University of Alabama School of Dentistry, and for 28 and a half years I was in private practice, mainly in Mobile. And there were some changes that took place at the office, and we made the decision that one of us would stay. It was a partnership, and the other would go, and I volunteered to be the one to leave. I thought there were some other things out there that I'd like to try. So in October of 2017, I started as the dental director for the Department of Public Health. It gives me a little bit different perspective because of the fact that I did come from a private sector into public health, and I see the disconnect between the two of them, and that's one of my goals, is to be able to take it and correct that, bridge that gap, and let the people that are in private practice actually know that there are resources that are available to them that they don't know about.
Well, I hope what we do here today helps bridge that gap, bring all of us a little bit closer in this dental care work. I know when you and I were talking in preparation for this interview, you said something that really stuck with me. And my takeaway from that statement was you want the mouth to no longer be considered an afterthought. What did you say?
It's my opinion that somewhere along the line the mouth got removed from the body. When you look at it from the standpoint of even an insurance company or something like that, the way that they deal with things, we are completely a different entity. Everything else is a specialty of medicine, and dentistry is not. And that, to me, that makes no sense, because the connection between oral health and overall health is undeniable. And so that's one of our goals, is to let people know that that this is the gateway to the body. And so we're doing our best.
We're going to talk in a little bit more detail about that connection between the mouth and the rest of the body, because it's quite fascinating and incredibly important when you talk about overall good health. But I want to start with a big piece of this puzzle in bridging the gaps and making dental care more of a priority. You have in front of you the copy of our state's dental plan. Talk a little bit about that document and how what I think that's the starting ground for what you're trying to do.
Right. When I first came to public health, there were two things that were priorities for me, that were told by our deputy director that this is what you need to concentrate on first. The first one was Children's Dental Health Month, something really big for it. And as you came and we appreciate it so much that you came and interviewed our winners last.
My pleasure.
Was it last week? I lose track of time at this point.
Yes.
But I would be remiss if I didn't, mention that, since it is Children's Dental Health Month. And so we have Kaylin Patterson and Braylon Coven are our winners. So that was one of the things that I designed, was a statewide smile contest to bring attention to Children's Dental Health Fund. The second thing that I had to do was to create a state oral health plan.
Mm-hmm.
Alabama at that time was one of 14 states that did not have one, and so that was where my priority was focused. And so what we did was our Oral Health Coalition of Alabama, which is just a ton of different organizations, groups, offices that get together, we came up with this state oral health plan. And so I'm very proud of the fact that I had the opportunity to author it, and it being the very first one that Alabama has had. But just as we talked about, as far as designing the book itself, what I wanted it to convey from the first time that you saw it was the connection of the mouth and the body, and that's the reason that the cover looks the way it does.
And since you say that, I have a copy of the cover here, so I will hold this up as you continue to talk about that so people can truly see what you're talking about. And these documents are available on your website. We'll mention that a little bit later, but this is exactly what you're talking about. What,
Yes.
a 100-page document that kind of sets some goals and priorities for what you want to do regarding our state's dental health care.
Right. A state oral health plan is sort of a roadmap to direct us as a state to specific concerns. There are 5 of them that we have listed in our oral health plan, and the first one is increase access to health care. The second is professional education and integration. The third is health literacy. The fourth is data and surveillance, and the fifth is prevention. And so that is what this document focuses on.
In a category of health literacy, that circles us back to what we were discussing a little bit earlier about that mouth and body connection. I want to highlight a couple of health issues that we know are very important when we talk about dental care. Let's start with dental care and certain types of cancer. How are those two issues connected?
Very tightly. There are several different types of cancer in the mouth. Several different areas where you can have it, but one of the ones that is a focus of ours is HPV-related oral pharyngeal cancers. And the oral pharynx is the back of the mouth. So if you have an HPV-related cancer, it's typically confined to that area back there. There are 2 strains which are primarily responsible for our oral pharyngeal cancers. And you can have oral pharyngeal cancers that are not HPV-related, but that is our focus. And so what's really important for us is to promote the HPV vaccine. And when you look at it from an interprofessional collaboration type of a situation, it could not be more of a perfect example because of the fact that this one vaccine takes care of 6 different types of cancer.
Wow.
It protects. It doesn't necessarily, we don't use the word prevent, but it protects against them. And the earlier you take the vaccine, the better. But as a dentist, if I, and here in Alabama, we are not, at this point in time, as a dentist, we cannot actually administer the vaccine. We refer to a physician to get the vaccine. And there's some thoughts along those lines as far as other states have actually begun allowing dentists to give the vaccine. But when you look at it from a standpoint of, as a dentist, I can recommend a vaccine for oral pharyngeal cancer, but at the same time it protects against the other 5 too. And cervical cancer is one of the other the really big ones. And as a matter of fact, several years ago, the incidence of oral pharyngeal cancer in men surpassed the number of cervical cancers in women. And that's not what people hear when when you're talking about HPV. They typically don't associate it with the type of a cancer in the mouth by men that's that prevalent.
Exactly, you're right. And I know it also has a connection to cardiovascular disease, and we don't really have time to get into all of that. But I know another issue that's very important to public health is dental care and the Count the Kicks initiative. Briefly share that connection between those two.
One of the things that is of utmost importance in dentistry is the need for expectant mothers to actually have good oral health. The same bacteria, some of the same bacteria that are present in gingivitis, periodontitis, periodontal disease, those bacteria can cause low birth weight, preterm babies. And both of those are actually, they're connected to infant mortality. Well, Iowa, the state of Iowa, sometime back, they decided that they would come up with an initiative, a way of being able to monitor a fetus's movements. So they began in the third trimester to monitor the amount of movement that the child had, and if there's a reduction in the amount of movement, then that is a sign that there could be potentially something wrong with the baby. And so they came up with this idea, and it's called Count the Kicks, and it's an evidence-based campaign, whereas that's what you do. You monitor the movements of the child. And so in a period of 10 years, they had a 32% reduction in stillbirths as a result of the Count the Kicks initiative, just nothing more than just knowing the movements of the child. And so very recently, Iowa decided that a really good place to actually promote this would also be a dental office, because of the fact that most people see their dentist more than they see their physician. And your hygienist especially, if you develop a rapport with them. I don't know about you, but I can tell you that when a dental chair leans back, you find out things about patients that you never even wanted to.
Okay, as a patient, I will confess I have shared.
So what better opportunity can you possibly have as a hygienist to in the third trimester, because at that point in time, in an ideal situation, you have been made aware of the fact that the mom is expecting anyway, and to have this conversation. And even though it's an app that is that's available on your phone, especially here in places like Alabama, we have areas that don't have really good Wi-Fi, and so they developed a way to actually help with that too. It's a wristband that has a slide on it to help you keep up with those movements. But one of the things that we were able to do is once we decided, Iowa is who developed the Count the Kicks initiative to begin with. They are also the first state to promote it in a dental environment, and Alabama is the second. So that makes me extremely happy. And so we actually had a proclamation signed for this past December being declared Count the Kicks Month in Alabama. And the people at Count the Kicks, the parent company or organization is Healthy Birthday Incorporated. They were so excited about the proclamation that they had one of their representatives come and actually take part in our proclamation signing. And so she came all the way from Iowa. And we were also fortunate that we had a local mom and baby save, as they're referred to, here in Montgomery, that also took place in the proclamation signing. And so we had Shamari and Aspen Cook. They came and they were part of the proclamation signing. And so it's there, and again, it's another way trying to connect things in the body back to the mouth.
Well, and it seems as though you all, in just a few short years that you've been here, have done a lot to further that connection and make people more aware, and then they have it celebrated with a proclamation signing, and for Alabama to be on the forefront, which is always good to hear. Mallory, let's bring you into this conversation, because I heard Dr. Harris say that water fluoridation is one of the biggest accomplishments of the dental profession. Now, I have to be honest, I had never heard the word fluoridation until I started researching this story last month. So why is that such a huge achievement, and what is fluoridation?
Well, fluoride comes from fluorine, which is one of the 15 most commonly found elements in the earth. And fluoridation is just adjusting it to the optimal level that helps prevent tooth decay. So when we are brushing our teeth, are we getting enough fluoride in that water to prevent tooth decay, or is the fluoridation just a way to kind of bump it up and further ensure that our teeth are being well protected while brushing? The fluoridation definitely helps bump it up, and of course it depends on if your local water authority does fluoridate in their water, and then of course if you're using fluoride in your toothpaste. But I know you all have a grant program that helps communities that want to take part in that. Talk a little bit about that grant program to encourage communities to better fluoridate their water. Okay, yes, we do. We offer funds to help communities that either already fluoridate, adjust their system to continue fluoridating, or maybe a water plant that doesn't fluoridate, help them to initiate fluoridation. And we send it out every year, and it is competitive, and we grade them, and then we award funds to different water plants in Alabama.
So I should be using fluoride toothpaste. Does all toothpaste have fluoride in it, pretty much?
Pretty much, but there is some that does not.
Okay,
so
okay.
Make sure.
What about drinking water that's fluoridated? Is that helpful as well? Would that be too much?
It's not too much. Some bottled water companies do add fluoride, but that's very uncommon. So when teeth and bones are still growing, when you drink fluoridated water, it helps protect your teeth, and it helps neutralize the bacteria in your mouth, and that helps protect your teeth as well.
Oh, excellent. So anything else you want to share about fluoridation that we need to know? Because I was fascinated. Like I said, I was on your website and I was going through and I saw you have like a couple of pages of pamphlets and information about fluoridation that if anybody wants to go to the website and see. But what are some other things about fluoridation that we need to know?
Well, a big one that stuck out to me because I'm rather new in this position is for every dollar spent on fluoridation, it saves $20 in dental care.
Wow, that is fascinating. So these investments are making great long-term health investments for all of us. Okay, excellent. Well, Dr. Johnson, as we begin to wrap up, I just want to just briefly mention you all do have community dental care. Interviewed Jennifer on that story last month, and the big piece of that is connecting people with dental insurance and also going into schools and checking for tooth decay. Take about 30 seconds to share that work, because I think it's important that we mention that while we have you all here today.
We just finished up what's called a basic screening survey. It's like a 5-year needs assessment, and what that is we go into, we had 52 different schools that we went to throughout the state, and we checked kindergarten and 3rd grade children to see the incidence of decay, whether they had treated decay, untreated decay, or the presence of sealants. And so by doing things like that, that falls under our surveillance category when we look at our goals in the state oral health plan. By looking at those numbers, we've been able to identify one particular area in Alabama that has a tremendous surge of tooth decay in their children. And so that's part of what Jennifer does. She actually helped us plan this entire event, going into schools and educating the students and the teachers, because they need to know why it is that they do what they're doing, not just be told that they need to do it.
Exactly. And what I found interesting when I spoke with her was that she mentioned that we aren't seeing dentists applying sealant in children as we normally would. And I think it's worthy to note because that's incredibly important when you talk about tooth decay and long-term tooth health. Sealants last well until adulthood. It's typically covered by insurance for children. If an adult wants to get a sealant, it's not a very expensive cost. So we want to encourage everybody to do that. Now, as you know, we at public television, we are educational TV. I would be remiss if we didn't leave out of here without some great education tips. So brush twice a day. Floss once at least. Floss once a day.
At least.
I should go get my teeth cleaned how often?
The recommendation is every 6 months.
Every 6 months. Soft bristle or hard bristle toothbrush? Soft.
Soft.
I knew you were going to come in hard on that one. And how much toothpaste on that toothbrush? Because I heard just a teeny tiny amount is all you need.
For an adult, it's about pea-sized.
Pea-sized.
And for a child, it's more like a grain of rice.
Okay. Well, I want to let all of our viewers know there's a treasure trove of information on your website. I was just fascinated as I was going through it, and we're going to put that website up on the screen. We also want to let our parents know that you all have activity sheets and coloring books and puzzles for, I think this one is for K through 5, and this one is for 5th grade and older. So as they talk with their children about dental care, they can also make it fun. And I just printed all this information from your website. It's colorful, it's attractive, it's easy to use. And I just thank you all so much for what you're doing. Anything else you all want to share about the work that you're doing that I didn't think to ask before we close this interview today?
Just the fact that you have mentioned all the different information that's available on the website. And by all means, just please go and take a look at it. And there are ways in there to contact us to be able to get these different things. One of the things that we face is when different areas of the state, if they decide that they're not going to fluoridate anymore, and a lot of times they won't tell the community about it until it's actually already done. So we were able, in 2018, we were able to pass a fluoridation law. And what the law states is that if a community water fluoridation operation is planning to discontinue fluoridation, then they have to notify the state health officer at least 90 days in advance. And that way we will know about it, so we can go out and educate the community and kind of rally the troops, so to speak. But one of the reason I bring that up at all, and looking at our website, Mallory has this is a fluoridation toolkit that we developed, which is extremely useful for communities for that purpose. We also have smaller brochures that are a condensed version of that that we have at health fairs and places like that. But basically everything that's available on our website, we will be glad to provide it to people at no charge. And there's a downloadable version, a PDF version of the state rural health plan that's on there as well.
It sure is. I looked at it myself. That's why I printed that cover sheet from. Well, thank you for what you're doing. We talk about closing the gap. That final statement you mentioned speaks back to your mission of closing this dental health care gap for dentists, for the community at large, for all of us. And so we thank you for what you do. And don't be a stranger. Always come back here and join us on Capitol Journal.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. And we'll be right back.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Joining us now is Christina Clark Okarmus, the Executive Director for the Alabama Campaign for Adolescent Sexual Health. Christina, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And a big APT welcome. This is your first time joining us here in studio. We love having first timers. Our previous guests were first timers, so we're 2 for 2 tonight so
awesome.
far. I know that you have been really involved in the trenches, on the ground with this adolescent sexual health work for years.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I started this work in 2011, fresh out of grad school, and you knew our predecessor, or my predecessor, Jamie Keith. So she hired me straight out of grad school, and I just have been here ever since. I think in 2019 is when I became executive director. Jamie retired, and I just have a real passion for young people receiving the information that they need about their bodies and how they work and how to make them healthy. And I didn't receive sexual health education, or at least not anything to brag about in my time at school. And so I think it's just a really important thing for young people.
I think I have the same story. I don't remember any real lessons in school. My mother was very open with me in talking about it, so I got my education from her.
Good.
And I'm really glad that I did. And I know that's a huge part of what you all do is educating parents, students, kids, community partners, all of that above. So when I hear adolescent sexual health, that's a pretty broad term. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, so, for us, sex ed, we really are looking to advance comprehensive sex ed. And so sex ed, by that we mean everything that really would touch on things related to relationships, healthy relationships, bodily autonomy, consent, of course, the ins and out of how just things work, that anatomy and reproductive anatomy and physiology is so important. Menstruation, puberty, it really runs the gamut, quite frankly. Sexual assault prevention, those sorts of things. And we are very focused on getting the message out to young people through the adults in their lives. So this, that we have done lots of trainings over the years, probably hundreds of trainings over the years of what we call youth serving professionals. So those folks that work with young people in some capacity. They're educators, they're school nurses, they are sometimes coaches, they are school counselors. They're interacting somewhere with young people in their lives.
Even community partners like Boys and Girls
Absolutely,
Clubs.
Yes. I failed to mention that, but absolutely. We've worked with Boys and Girls Club before. And so, yes, we are looking to reach those adults that can reach their young people with this information. And parents are such a critical part of passing on this information. We want to empower parents to have these conversations with their young people, to to feel confident and comfortable having these conversations. So a lot of times parents don't feel that way. Even for me who works in sexual health, being a mom, it's kind of daunting to think about having those conversations. But I know that there are tools that are out there, that there are folks that can guide me in the right direction. And I was just having a conversation the other night with some parents of preschoolers, and they were, right on the right track in terms of talking about consent. The whole, we sometimes think of it as like the good touch, bad touch conversation.
Yes,
but even just consent for hugging your child or giving them a kiss, or my daughter now she tells me when she doesn't want her picture taken, and that's all part of consent. We don't think of it that way, but it is all part of consent, and empowering our young people to say, no, this body is mine, and I'm allowed to decide what happens to it. And so we want to empower young people to have that feeling, and then also to empower parents to give them that feeling.
And I'm glad you mentioned parents, because I have to be very honest. As I told you before we started the interview, I have a stepdaughter who's been married for several years.
Yes.
She and her husband just had their first baby a few months ago. And I still find it hard to have that sex conversation with her, or to even fathom that in my mind. And she's very grown.
Yeah.
So what do you hear from parents? They have to feel empowered with the information that you give them.
Yeah, it seems like what I hear mostly is, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that there is someone here to talk to us about this, because maybe they didn't know it. Sometimes that's the case, that they just didn't have that information themselves, because unfortunately we haven't had great sex ed in this state for a long time. And so sometimes parents just don't have the information themselves. Sometimes it's just a discomfort. A lot of the times I'll tell parents, it's not one conversation. I think when I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, it was like the big talk. And now we tell parents it's many conversations happening over the lifespan of your child, and finding those opportunities in everyday circumstances. So you watch something on TV. Oh, did you notice that relationship? How did you feel about that? What did you think about that? Or maybe it's something they hear in music. Oh, that was an interesting lyric. Like, how do you like that? Doesn't sound like consent to me. Or how do you feel? Just like prodding through the everyday things that they're experiencing.
And it makes it a lot more user friendly. It's not as though the parent is poking and picking, but we're having a very generic conversation about
organic,
something. Very organic.
Yes.
That's the word I was looking for.
Yes,
organic. You mentioned sex education and it being lacking.
Yes.
What is sex education curriculum? How does Alabama address that in our schools? So
unfortunately, Alabama does not have a state sex ed curriculum. We do have a sex ed law that requires, if schools teach, so they're not required to teach, but if they do teach, that they should emphasize abstinence, but also talk about various forms of contraceptive measures in a medically accurate way. So we think that that's actually pretty good from our comprehensive, trying to advance comprehensive sex ed perspective. Comprehensive sex ed is the whole bag. It is abstinence at some point in a person's life. Certainly for our younger folks, we'd hope that's what they would choose. But when they get older, or when they enter into a romantic relationship, sex may be on the table, and then we want them to know how they can protect themselves. Even, once folks get older, there may be periods of abstinence where they need to know how to negotiate that within a partnership. And then certainly when those periods are over, they need to know how to negotiate condom use or get on the right contraceptive for themselves to prevent an unplanned pregnancy, but also certainly to prevent STIs, HIV, and also just to be empowered. It's not all just about preventing things that are unwanted, but also just to feel empowered and like they can take care of themselves.
Because you all track, in addition to teen pregnancy rates, you all track STIs, those types of rates, and that data as well.
Yes.
What have you found?
So we found that teen pregnancy rates for the last 10 plus years have steadily declined. Same with teen birth rates. We're still quite high compared to the other states in our country, but we're declining. Unfortunately, STI and HIV rates do not see the same decline. So what we kind of guess is that young people are beginning to feel more comfortable using contraceptive measures, but not so much condoms. And so there's still only about a 50% rate of young people who are engaging in sexual activity that are using condoms when they're engaging in those activities. So because of that, we're seeing higher STI and HIV rates. In fact, Alabama, I believe, the last time I checked, we have 3 of the top 20 cities in the country. So unfortunately,
Wow.
we're quite high, Montgomery being one of them.
Well, we know one thing that you're doing to wrap and bringing this all together, connecting government with the everyday people, is and I'm going to read this to make sure I say it
Okay.
correctly. Today wraps the end of the National Sex Education Week of Action.
Yes.
Talk about that national campaign.
Yes. So we are partnered with a national organization, SECUS, and they are all about advancing sex ed nationally. And so this is the second annual National Sex Ed Week of Action. And so they are working with states across the country to implement action plans. So we've been implementing this plan all week on our social media pages, on our website. We had, I think we're going to talk about it in a second, but we had an event prior to the week. And then we have our Advocacy Day coming up, which I think we're also going to talk about. So I'm just going to plug those here. But yeah, so the idea is, what is sex ed in your state? What are areas for growth? What are things that are not so great, and what can we improve on? Sharing sex ed stories. I've heard a lot of stories of young people over the years about just their sex ed being so lacking. Or unfortunately, we also hear about really shameful sex ed where, you chew a piece of gum, and if you have sex before you're married, you are like that piece of gum. You're used. And we've heard lots of different, like with rose petals, the same thing. Kind of this analogy of...
And I heard that. No man wants a flower that's already been plucked. Those types of things that you're talking about.
So unfortunately, those ideas still exist out there, and we want to be there to say, well, actually, we don't really have an opinion, I guess, really about young people having sex, except that we want them to be empowered and safe, and we want them to do that at a time that is right for them. We want to give them all the information that they need to protect themselves.
And you want to remove the shame and the stigma if they do go down that road, because they might want to take a different direction, and you want young people to know that they have a support system in their adult community that will help them whatever direction they choose to take.
Absolutely.
Well, let's jump into what you did in Alabama. I thought it was very creative. So talk about the Alabama work that you all did for this Sex Education Week of Action.
Yeah, so we had a little bit of fun creating some postcards. So this first one says, "Support young people making healthy and informed decisions, sex ed for all." And then this next one is help people prevent unplanned pregnancy, comprehensive and inclusive sex ed for all. And so what we did was we had two events on February 3rd and 4th here in Montgomery. We opened it up on our socials. We tried to get some folks to attend. I think we had about 20 folks between the two events. And we wrote like 120 postcards to Governor Ivey, to the Lieutenant Governor, to Attorney General Steve Marshall. We wrote to a lot of our local state legislators, just letting them know the importance of comprehensive sex ed for young people. A lot of people shared their stories about how they didn't receive sexual health education. A minute ago you talked about the shame. Another reason that's so important to destigmatize and de-shame sex ed is because some young people go through sexual assault situations where they didn't have a choice. And so there were stories like that were shared. And they were just really powerful stories about how young people need access to this information because us as adults didn't get it, or it was given to us in a really harmful way, or in a way that further traumatized us maybe. And so we hope that the governor and our state legislators are willing to hear that message and see what they can do to improve sex ed in Alabama.
A couple of things I want to hit on before we leave. I know our time is winding down, but these are, I think, two very important pieces of our conversation. I know one of the things that you all are concerned about is the reversal of Roe v. Wade.
Yes.
Got a little tongue-tied there. Sorry about that. Talk a little bit about why that is of concern to the work that you do.
Yeah. So our primary concern, because we don't really work in the abortion space, but our primary concern is that the same sort of logic and argument that was made to reverse Roe v. Wade will be, we believe, used to reverse access to contraception for all people, for unmarried people. Could also, these long-standing Supreme Court decisions that were made, back in the 60s and the 70s and the 50s, allowing us to have access to contraception, they all stand on this right to privacy, and so we're concerned about that. We're concerned about the potential reversal of LGBTQ folks being able to be married, because that is a population that we very strongly support. And so we just want to be sure that those things aren't rolled back. And then I think we're also just concerned because it takes away a little bit of that bodily autonomy, not a little bit, a lot of that bodily autonomy. And that is something that we are in strong favor of is folks having the information that they need to make empowered decisions about their body and what's best for them and their families.
And if I remember correctly, when I was researching, preparing for this conversation today, there was also some concern about how that could be a possible attack on sex ed curriculum in school.
So, yeah, I'm not sure how that might all work out, but I do know that there has been a big push for parental rights lately at school board meetings. And, the Alabama campaign certainly believes that parents have a place in the conversation around sex ed. They are the best educators for their young people. They should be the first educators for their young people. And sometimes they just don't have those tools, and that's where we like to come alongside and help them. But with the parental rights groups, unfortunately, it's pushing out the right for all young people to have sex ed because they typically want their young people to not receive any sex ed at school. But that takes away the rights of other young people to receive that education, which could be life-saving education for some young people. And so I would just say to those groups, whatever you want to teach your young people at home, that's great, and we support that, and that schools do have a place in the sex education conference. We have a captive audience in public schools where we can really be changing their lives and giving them life-saving information that they will use maybe now, but maybe not until they're adults. And regardless of when they use it, they need that information.
Okay, and I want to drive home that you all use evidence-based curriculum. Research and the trainings that you do. Yes.
So any sort of curriculum that we do or professional development is all based on evidence-based curricula or evidence-informed curricula. We are always medically accurate, age-appropriate. I know age-appropriate can mean different things to different people. But so, for instance, I have a preschooler. When we talk to her, we use medically accurate names for all of our body parts. That is actually a great tip for preventing child sexual abuse, is to empower your young people to know what all their body parts, including their genitals, are called. So we do that. We ask if we can hug. We ask if we can kiss. When I pull out the phone and she says no pictures, I don't take her picture because we're trying to teach her your body is your own. You can say no, and that's okay. You can say no to an adult, and that's okay. So that's age appropriate for her. But age appropriate for a high schooler is information about condoms and contraceptions and things that they will need to be healthy for the rest of their lives.
And what age range do you target? I know you adolescents, so what age range is your?
Yeah, so we have resources on our website for really almost any age, but we are really targeting that what you would typically think of as adolescence. So 13, some people only think till 18, but we really go all the way up to 24 because the science has shown that brain continues to develop even into the 30s sometimes. So we really are looking like 13 to 24-year-olds.
Well, look, as we conclude this conversation, and we have a graphic with your website on that we're going to put up on the screen and the full name of the organization for anybody who might want additional information or may want to contact you. But I am well into my 50s, 52 as a matter of fact, and I am still developing and learning a lot. I learned a lot from our conversation today. Christina, it was truly my pleasure to have you here. There's so much more we can talk about. We have to have you come back.
I would love
and
to
continue these conversations. It'll be post-session if we do.
Okay. Can I plug the Advocacy Day real quick?
Oh, yes. Let's mention this. Definitely mention your
so
Advocacy
we are
Day.
partnering with AIDS Alabama this year, which is an AIDS service organization out of Birmingham. They actually have an office in Mobile, too. But they are going to be doing an Advocacy Day on April 6th. We are joining with them. And our talking points will be around comprehensive sex ed, advancing comprehensive sex ed for this in the state. We're hoping to have a number of young people there to share their message. So if you can join us, we will have registration information on our website very soon.
And will that be here at the State House?
Yes, it will be here in Montgomery at the State House. I believe we're going to have like a rally and some lunch and some speakers. And then, of course, we'll be at the State House to talk to our legislators.
And I know that address all too well, 11 South Union Street, Montgomery 36130, because we
That's
are right in
right.
the State House as well. Christina, thank you so much. And thank you all. We'll be right back.
Thank you, Karen.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page.
Well, our last guest for tonight's show is State Senator Will Barfoot, the new chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Barfoot, welcome back. Thank you for joining us once again.
Glad to be here with you.
Well, I'm glad to have you here with me, and so excited about the new position for you. Congratulations. Talk to us a little bit about that. What will be your leadership style in this position, and what are some of your goals and plans for the Senate Judiciary Committee?
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, it's an honor. I can't think of a committee that I would rather chair more in the Alabama State Senate than the Judiciary Committee. You know, being an attorney, and that's near and dear to my heart. The committee itself handles lots of different types of bills. I mean, civil, criminal related, bills that touch all areas, aspects of the day-to-day lives of citizens throughout the state, and a pretty large number of those bills actually that flow through the legislative process flow through the Judiciary Committee. I've been here 4 years, so I've served as the vice chair under Senator Ward when he was here, and now Director Ward with Pardons and Parole, and then had an opportunity to serve with Senator Watley for the past 2 years, and saw both of their leadership styles, and I think, you know, probably be similar. You have your own style and you're who you are, and but I think that the congeniality that we've experienced in the Senate as a whole, and specifically in the Judiciary Committee, will continue. We've got some excellent members on there. Most of them are returning members, and a couple of new faces, so looking forward to working with them.
And speaking of the congeniality and the issues that you cover, I have sat in that committee many, many years. I won't date myself. I've been here for quite some time. But one of the things I've noticed that some of the issues that come through that committee are issues that I've heard discussed at the national level, and they become very contentious and divisive. Things like racial profiling.
Right.
You all had the midwifery legislation, which is a woman's reproductive health rights issue. There's a possibility if the House sends it your way, you might have Representative Alan Treadaway's anti-riot bill. I've heard discussions on these types of legislation. And for example, last year, I believe it was, Senator Roger Smithman had the Crown Act, which is legislation that would require the acceptance of certain natural hairstyles or culturally representative hairstyles in the workplace. I've heard this issue discussed in Texas and in Louisiana, where kids in school had some of these natural hairstyles, particularly representative of the black community,
right,
where they were told to cut their hair or take their beads out of their hair. There was a young man who was told he couldn't graduate because he had locks. Now keep in mind, he had followed the school's rules. They weren't long because he couldn't have long hair. He always kept them pinned up. But right before graduation, they told him to cut them or not walk. And that was hurting to his culture.
Sure.
When I heard that discussion last year between Senator Arthur Orr and Roger Smithman, it was such a civil and a great example of civil discourse. It was a healthy conversation. And what I noticed, Senator Orr, who, this is not in his wheelhouse, brought out some really good points that Senator Smithman, the sponsor, really accepted. How do you see, particularly with new members in the committee and in the Senate, moving forward with having this great level of healthy, productive conversation, even on issues you may not understand or agree with, but the conversations have been very productive?
Well, I think, first of all, the Senate being a deliberative body, and even in the committee, I think, we try to have that happen, and especially within the Judiciary Committee. I mean, it's not made up entirely of lawyers, but there are a good number of lawyers on that committee, and as lawyers, I think we like to debate, listen, but it's also important to understand when you're debating or you're advocating for a position that you understand the other person's position and what they're advocating for, with an open mind to listen and take all that into account. So I think having lawyers, by and large, on the Judiciary Committee and having that mindset has served us well at least since I've been here, and I think that'll continue to happen, because I think there needs to be, within the legislative body, not just the Senate or not just the Judiciary Committee, there needs to be discussions, well thought out discussions, arguments, debates, civil arguments, so that we listen to each other's viewpoint, and then ultimately we'll make a decision to vote either for or against a bill based on the information we have. So.
And I will say, in all fairness to Senator Orr, when he was raising those questions, they were not to kill the bill.
Right.
I want to make sure I make that very clear. They were really to educate himself on an issue he was not familiar with. Speaking of issues, I know you have a bill that will be coming through your committee that you had last year regarding driver's licenses and suspensions. Talk about that, because I know that was a big issue here in Montgomery County at one time.
It was, and so I'm passionate about that. And so going back, kind of setting a little bit of a history, several years ago, I thought, why are we suspending licenses for something other than someone being unable to safely control a motor vehicle or drive it on the streets or highways of the state of Alabama. There are some reasons that we probably could not undo financially. The federal government requires suspensions of license, for instance, if child support's not being paid. Really makes no sense to me, but that's a federal guideline that's in place that we have no control over. But that process got me to thinking, why are we suspending licenses for folks who otherwise might be safe drivers? There's a point system in place already, right? And if you accumulate a number of points, that your license could be suspended. We're not tackling that. We're not removing that, and we think certain people should not be able to drive. But this is the bill that I had last year, which I will bring back in some form or fashion, maybe with some tweaks this year, basically addressed two things. Post-adjudication, in other words, if you received a traffic citation and you went to court and either pled guilty to it or were found guilty of it, and the judge assessed court costs or fines, maybe they put you on a payment plan or a review to come back to see if that those amounts have been paid. Well, some jurisdictions, if you miss one post-adjudication court appearance date, we're sending a notice of suspension to ALEA. Well, I think there should be a little bit more grace.
And let me stop. ALEA, sure. The Alabama Law Enforcement Agency.
That's correct.
Our state police, so to speak.
That's right. And to ALEA's credit, I mean, they were just the recipient of this from a court system to say, hey, suspend someone's license. I think people should show up to court. I think they should pay their court costs and fines. But I think there should be some grace. For instance, if you just happen to not miss a court appearance date post-adjudication, one court date, then your license would not be suspended automatically. If you miss more than that, then the courts would still have within their toolbox the ability to send that to ALEA to suspend your license. And by the way, still would have the ability, even on the first one, to send out a warrant for your arrest. And then as it relates to payments, obviously things, inflation is out there, and it's difficult to sometimes manage the bills that we have. With that being said, if you violate the rules of the road and the court imposes court costs and fines, it's your responsibility to pay those. And we're not suggesting that those shouldn't be paid. What we are suggesting in last year's bill was that if you post-adjudication, if you've been ordered to pay court costs and fines, and just by simply missing a month's payment should not mean that your license is then therefore suspended. We should show some grace. And by the way, I think ultimately it is a workforce issue. I mean,
and I was going to say that you're right.
100%. And now don't hear me wrong. I think there are people who are driving to get to work who don't have licenses or have suspended, but certainly I think that would help in the workforce participation that we desperately need in the state of Alabama.
Thank you. Well, our time is winding down so quickly. We never have enough time to talk.
I know.
But I want to get to a couple of more issues. In his inaugural address, Lieutenant Governor Will Ainsworth said, and I hope I'm quoting him correctly, that we want to make Alabama the most military-friendly state in the nation. That has been a core of his work. You were part of that work last year. You sit on the Military and Veterans Affairs Committee. Talk about that work, what you've done, and why that is so critical to our state.
Well, I think Lieutenant Governor, exactly, he saw something that needed to be done, especially throughout the state, but especially as it affects Montgomery. The Base Realignment and Closure Commission, BRAC, at one point in time, they go look and see which bases nationally need to be closed. And there's some things that we needed to have accomplished. Reciprocity. If a family were moving here pursuant to orders from the military, could their spouse, that person's spouse, practice that profession that they were in another state? That was one of the things that we've changed. We've added some reciprocity. There was a charter school bill that I had that related to military families coming into the school system here in Montgomery that allowed for that expansion of the charter school system for them. So I think we've done a number of things at the Lieutenant Governor's leadership on that to make sure that Alabama truly is the most military-friendly state in the nation.
And we know here in Maxwell is home to Air University, where our military pilots come to train. It's a very prestigious honor that we have here. And I would just personally say I was born on Maxwell Air Force Base. So to me, I have a little bit of a kinship, a little friendship, there with Maxwell. So having that there, and our military families bring so much to our community because they come from different places. We can learn from them. I've had such great relationships with Maxwell and Gunner and our military families here around the state. So they are truly a benefit. And you want to have that diversity here in the state so that those of us who are from Alabama can have it to learn and glean from.
Yeah, and it's not only while they're here serving out what their orders while they're here, but so many of the military families, when they see Alabama and they see Montgomery and the surrounding areas, they like what they see, and they may be after retirement, they may consider moving back here. it's a great benefit to the state of Alabama. So,
and they are a great economic driver here in
100%.
Montgomery and around the state as well.
Absolutely.
I know 4 years ago you were the new kid on the block,
Yeah.
the new guy, the freshman, so to speak. Now you are a seasoned player, no longer a rookie on this team. What are some of your words of advice and words of wisdom to the new members coming in? We have quite a pretty big number, I guess I could say, in both the House and the Senate, but specifically in the Senate, as you work hand in hand with some of these new members, what do you want to say to them? Because 4 years from now, they could be like you, be a Senate chairman.
well,
Senate
I
chairman.
hope they aspire to be better than me. But I will say this: I think the main thing is be who you are, be yourself. Don't get caught up in some of the politics or be humble about you've been given an opportunity by the folks that voted for you to represent them. Never forget that. Learn the people, learn the politics, and then make sure you're right on the policy. And some of that takes a while. I don't care who you are. It takes a while when you're thrown in this to figure it all out. Even something as simple as figuring out where the restroom is on what floor, which I had a problem with for the first week or so. So anyway, it really does. It takes a while. Enjoy it. Be humble about it. Never forget why you came here.
I've been around these parts for 20 plus years, and I tell you, I'm still learning something new every session.
Amen.
That is so very true. Well, Senator Barfoot, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Love always having you come and stop by.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
So have I. Well, that's our show for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Join Todd Stacy right here next Friday at 7:30, Sunday at noon. I'm Karen Goldsmith for the entire Capital Journal team. Make it a great one.